Arif Hasan. He covers the NFL, and you can check out his work at wideleft.football. He also co-hosts a Vikings podcast called Norsecode. Welcome, Arif. How you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
We're doing well out here in the Bay. Obviously, that's the Vikings and the 49ers on Sunday. Let me ask you this. Last year, the Vikings defense did a pretty good job against the 49ers offense. They held them to 17 points. Looking back at that game, what do you think the secret was for the Vikings, and do they have another effort like that in them?
Yeah, I mean, in that game, I think there was a question about whether or not Christian McCaffrey was going to play full or have a pitch count. I think he played all the snaps that he was going to play otherwise, but there were some injury concerns about him, which sounds pretty familiar at this point. I believe Deebo Samuel wasn't playing in that game. That probably also helped the Vikings defense. But for the most part, I mean, these matchups change all the time, every year. I think a lot of it is just that the Vikings are, traditionally they've been a very creative team on defense. They continue to be a creative team on defense. And that, I think, is a big part of it. Also helps to have, a little bit more resolution at quarterback than the Vikings have right now. But I think every one of these matchups ends up being a little bit different as we go year by year. I don't anticipate kind of a similar result for the Vikings heading into this week.
Arif, it was kind of weird. I was watching the Vikings Sunday, and I don't know what expectations I had for them, but they won the game, they easy per se. But Brian Flores, again, had success against Kyle and the Niners last year, mainly with the six-man front. And we saw Jordan Mason run all over the Jets. Do you think we see that type of game plan from Flores and the Minnesota Vikings to stop the run and make Brock beat him in the air?
Yeah, I think so. It's going to be kind of difficult because, against the run, you want to make sure that you get people going up against all of those gaps as quickly as possible, which, implies something about a blitz-friendly scheme like the Vikings have. But Brock Purdy is one of the best blitz beaters in the NFL, so you have to be really careful about that. Also, the 49ers run to the outside a lot more than most teams, despite being kind of this big ground-and-pound team. And so you have to be careful. You got to make sure that people, have the ability to go sideline to sideline. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings load up a number of players in the box, but some of those players could be like safety Josh Metellus, not necessarily a bigger linebacker, but a pass rush safety, so they can do, the kinds of things that allow them to get to the outside while still making sure that they're disciplined against the run.
Arif Hasan joining us on 95.7 The Game. He covers the NFL, and he's the co-host of the Vikings podcast, Norsecode. Last year, Kirk Cousins had a great game against the 49ers. I think it was 35 for 45 for about 380. What was the key to that big game for Cousins last year? And, I mean, Justin Jefferson didn't play in that game. Can Sam Darnold have anything resembling the same kind of success?
Yeah, I mean, it's always possible. Again, I'm a little bit skeptical that Darnold will play up to the level that Kirk Cousins did last year. And I remember, before Cousins got hurt, he was playing at an MVP level. And that sounds really ridiculous to say now, but his numbers were outstanding the entire kind of 8 games that he was playing. So he was playing at a really high level. The Vikings have done a really good job really maximizing who he was. I don't know that Sam Darnold can reach that level from game to game. Yeah, he did well against the Giants. It will be difficult for him to do something like that against the 49ers, but having Justin Jefferson in this game, that's going to be a pretty big help. If I recall correctly, TJ Hawkinson was also in that 49ers game, not going to be available for the Vikings this week. And I think that's kind of a big part of it, is that the Vikings always have a couple of answers to the defensive problems that are being thrown at them. Here, potentially without Jordan Addison, they're really going to have to rely on Justin Jefferson and maybe Aaron Jones to kind of relieve that pressure. And I think it's going to be that pass-run balance that might be the key to making sure that Sam Darnold has enough space to operate.
Arif, I got to ask you about Brock Purdy. It's just amazing, right? The guy comes out of nowhere, leads the team to the NFC Championship game, wrecks his elbow, comes back, takes the team to almost the Super Bowl win over the Chiefs, and yet we got callers and fans saying it's Kyle, it's not Brock. If you don't mind, can you share with us what you see from afar when you watch Brock Purdy quarterback?
Yeah, certainly. I think that if Brock Purdy had landed with another team or with another coach, it's really likely that we wouldn't have seen this, not just because other coaches don't give, quarterbacks like him a lot of chances. That is true. But part of it is that Brock Purdy changed his playing style really substantially from his time at Iowa State and even in his time, with the 49ers. I think Kyle Shanahan played a really big part in developing him and creating a system that really maximized what he did. He was a gunslinger at Iowa State. He played a lot of hero ball. It wasn't really working out for him. And in his first year with the 49ers, he kind of restricted that until basically the final weeks of the season and into the postseason. And even then, it looked like he was about to get into some trouble. He's modulated that really well now, and I think that's a part of the reason that he's really successful. Obviously, having a great skill core is really successful. I'm skeptical that he is as good a quarterback as the numbers would suggest, but certainly he's not a bad quarterback being propped up by Kyle Shanahan. I think that there's something kind of in concert with the two where Shanahan is making a pretty good quarterback look great.
Arif Hasan joining us on 95.7 The Game. He's a co-host of the Vikings podcast, Norsecode, and you can check out his work at wideleft.football. I bet I'm going to ask you a question you've never heard before, and it's this one. Christian McCaffrey obviously has got a calf and Achilles injury, and we're talking about the difference between playing on grass and playing on turf. Can you describe the turf in Minnesota? Is it considered a hard turf? Are there complaints about it? Or is it just your standard artificial surface?
For the most part, it is a bit of a standard artificial surface. Again, like artificial surfaces versus grass, it is faster than the natural playing surfaces, which means it is harder than natural playing surfaces, but it's not an unusually hard one. And one of the things that kind of differentiates some of the turfs, like the ones that the Vikings have installed in US Bank Stadium, from some of the more problematic turf installations around the league, is that they do a really good job of preventing seams in that turf from showing up, and that's what's caused a lot of the injuries on turf, in addition to how hard it is and when you're pushing off of it and stuff like that. I don't think it's going to be a huge consideration for the 49ers, the playing surface in this case, just with Christian McCaffrey. I mean, he has played on turf before, and it's been fine, and I think he kind of knows how to play in those situations. I think in other turf situations around the league, probably you'd want to make that a bigger consideration because the risks are a little bit bigger. But the injury rate for the Vikings, especially lower body injuries, not super high for opponents playing at US Bank Stadium either.
Arif, we saw young Jordan Addison make the biggest play last year on Monday Night Football against the Niners, and we know Justin Jefferson's incredible, but he needs help. What's Addison's availability for this game?
It's still a little bit day-to-day. He was a limited participant in practice. I think that they're going to try and figure that out essentially on game day. I think they're optimistic. Addison said he's optimistic, and so you can't always trust an athlete when they say that. They're always gearing to play. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but it seems like it's a little bit up in the air. I'm operating under the assumption that he won't, just because it takes kind of a lot to pull someone out early in a game. But anything can happen, of course.
One thing I've been reading and seeing is that there aren't a lot of expectations for the Vikings this year, but you won opening day. Is there any chance that this team can surprise and win 9 or 10 games?
Yeah, certainly. I think so. I think that there's just a couple of uncertainties that can break in either direction. I think Sam Darnold's level of play is a big one. Obviously, you talk to people, who knew him in a short time in San Francisco, and they say that he's a much different quarterback than the one, we think of when we think of Sam Darnold, the one with the Jets, and they're all pretty positive. I've talked to insiders who know some of the coaches who've been there around for practice, and so they think, the world of him. His final 6 games in Carolina, also really high-level stuff, and so he might be a better quarterback than a lot of us have given him credit for. That might be a reason that the Vikings can be on a path to 8 or 9 wins, and then the defense, it was talent deficient last year. Brian Flores found a way to make sure that the defense was really stellar for about 10 games that season, and that was enough to kind of put them in a lot of these conversations. It fell apart at the end, but with an increase in the amount of defensive talent, a new, cadre of pass rushers, a refresh in the secondary, that defense looks really fantastic, admittedly, against the New York Giants. That can kind of push that potentially 8-9 win team to 9-10 wins. So it's on the table. I think it's unlikely, but it's certainly on the table.
Arif, we got a game tonight, obviously, Buffalo and Miami, and I thought of Tua and Brian Flores, obviously the defensive coordinator that I mentioned a few minutes ago. And Tua had some some comments about Brian Flores, and I was curious to get your thoughts and how much traction that got out there in Minnesota, if at all.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that they asked about immediately after those comments. People became aware of them. I think it went on a podcast. And before we could even ask Flores any of these questions, a couple of the defensive players, came out to the podium unannounced and just showed their support for him. It was nice to see. It tells us a little bit about his interactions with the defenders on the team. It was unprompted, which I think tells us a lot. But I think more important is kind of how he responded to that, because he didn't necessarily say that he was in the right, and he didn't necessarily say that he didn't do any of these things. What he said was it hurt him to hear that, and that he needed to learn more about himself to see why that situation had emerged the way it did. Now, that's not fully taking responsibility, of course, but I think it's as close as you're going to get, and I think it's really good, because I think that's how leadership should emerge. You hear about a problem, you want to fix it instead of kind of deny it. And so I think that's a good direction to go in, because I think it's pretty likely that, he may have mistreated, some of the players, especially Tua, in Miami. And I like him from my interactions with him, the way the team has talked about him. But that doesn't mean he was the same guy in Miami. And I'm excited to hear that that's something he's willing to learn from.
Arif, great stuff. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And enjoy the game on Sunday.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. That's Arif Hasan. And all guests on 95.7 The Game appear on the River Islands guest line.